Hi everyone, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and today with our sponsor Alana, I am starting something that I have never done before. I am currently winding 2 skeins of Knit Picks Wool of the Andes onto my ball winder at the same time. I have them both on my umbrella swift, so that way I can pull them both at the same time while I wind them onto the ball winder. Now, the ball winder probably cannot fit 200 grams of yarn, so I'm expecting I'm probably going to need to finish this by hand, but the goal is to try to create 2 symmetrical matching gradient skeins doing some cake dyeing. And again, I would like to thank Alana for sponsoring this episode. If you'd like to learn more about sponsoring an episode of Dyepot Weekly, you can find a link in the video description. By going really slow, I was able to get all 200 grams on this ball winder. This cake is by no means even. It's sort of pyramid shaped, almost cone shaped, but I'm impressed with how even the yardage of the 2 skeins is. I did, as I was winding, have to use my hand to like hold that little eye back a bit because otherwise it would catch the ball, but yeah, I'm impressed. We've got a 200 gram cake here. Again, this cake is not perfect. If I flip it over, you can see that the bottom is way flatter than the top. However, this should still work to get us some kind of really cool broken gradient with food coloring. And I suppose the odd shape of this cake shows why if you wanted to get matched gradients in one pot, how winding them together is really the way you want to go about this. If I were to have wound 2 different cakes, they could have had slightly different shapes, slightly different tightness, and in this, we know that both skeins are sort of treated equally throughout. I want to go pigmented today. Plus, we are using 200 grams of yarn, so we can use a little bit more food coloring than we otherwise might use. I am going to start with 2/3 of a tablespoon of delphinium blue, roughly. And right here I have a cup of warm-ish tap water to help things dissolve a bit faster. I am going to add, this is messy, this is why I'm wearing gloves. I think this is a 1/4 teaspoon of black. And I'm going to finish this off with a 1/4 teaspoon of brown. And I think of all of these colors, my brown is pretty ancient, but I am really excited to see what kind of color this turns into. Here's just a little snippet of the color. It is looking like the black is probably dominating the other hues, but I'm really excited to see what this does on the yarn. In my pot, I have 12 cups of water, and right now there is no vinegar at all. I want there to be time for some color to sort of penetrate towards the center, and since I know that the center of my yarn cake is so tight that we could end up with some whites on the inside, but I figured that this would be a nice way to start out. Here's our cake, which has an asymmetric bottom and top, but I think I'm going to go with this side down. So I decided I wanted to do it. And the yarn cake, you can see, is just floating on top. We are completely dry. It will take sort of some time to sink in a little bit. I'm still warming things up, but I think I'm going to need to add a little more water because I have it on like the base of the pot now, and that is not coming up. But ooh, I see sort of like a great, like almost like purpley tone around the outside that's sort of coming up. Ooh, okay, I'm gonna get some more water. And try adding 4 more cups. There we go. We're floating now, which is good. I think we're floating, sort of-ish. As for like the food coloring, this mixture has a lot. We've got red 3, red 40, yellow 5, yellow 6, blue 1, and yeah, it looks like we've got this bluish color, but with that sort of like hints of red to it. Some of the reds might start striking right away, but they also could take a little bit longer because there's not acid in here yet. The blues, even once I add like 1 tablespoon of vinegar, the blues will still take a while to bind, but right now, sort of letting some of these colors soak in towards the center, and you can see even on the top that it's sort of going through a bit. So, and we're even not quite at near a boil, but I'm gonna let this sit for 5 minutes, and then we are gonna add our first tablespoon of vinegar. All right, these 5 minutes are up. I am going to poke the rest of that down, and I've got sort of like a deep purple to a dark blue. There's still tons and tons of color left in here. So now I am going to add our first tablespoon of vinegar to the pot. Oops, maybe a little more. And you can see where I poured it on top of that yarn that it got a little bit pink. And that is because none of these blues have really started to bind. You can see that little pink spot that we got there. But hopefully these reds did penetrate pretty well. So I'm going to reduce the heat a little bit, and yeah, I think, the colors are showing up, I think, brighter on camera than they are in person. There we go. The colors are actually pretty deep and saturated right now, even with the huge amount of color that is left in the pot. So with the heat on low, I'm gonna let this go 10 minutes. We'll come back and check where we are color-wise, but already the color is feeling a lot more blue. The red hints have sort of already struck. Our pretty yarn cake is just sort of hanging out, and I see a lot of these deep, it looks like a deep teal, that is left there. So now I'm gonna go ahead and add 2 tablespoons of vinegar, bringing this to 3. I think I sort of forgot, yeah, you can see that when I added that those blues really haven't started striking yet. Oh, approximately 3. I think that when I started adding the vinegar, I maybe forgot that I started with 12 cups of water, and then I added more. Usually the ratio I start around is 1 tablespoon of vinegar in 8 cups of water. But we now have 3 cups of vinegar in, or 3 tablespoons of vinegar in 16 cups of water. So I'm assuming that I will be adding more, but this should help some of those yellows start to go, and yeah, I'll be back in 10 minutes and we'll add more vinegar if needed. One of the things that's kind of cool right now is I'm seeing some like hints of pink in that center. The color is there's still a lot of color in there. But I do believe that we have some amount of penetration through this whole ball. I'm going to go ahead and add, I think, 3 tablespoons of vinegar. 1, 2, 3. This is tightly wound, and so the surface area to the amount of yarn we have in the pot is really, really low. Like there's not a lot of place for these dyes to come into contact with this yarn really quickly. And so I'm sort of just like moving it in there to kind of, I guess, move the vinegar around a little bit and give it a little space. So it'll probably take, you know, a lot longer. I might need to add even more vinegar. I think, I'm up to about 6 tablespoons now, but I'm pretty excited with the way that some of these tones are going. So anyway, I will be back in another 10 minutes. All right, after those 10 minutes, I'm still seeing a lot of blue, and I'm not sure if it's cleared or what. But let's go ahead and add just a lot of vinegar now. So I am going to go ahead and add 1, 2, 3, roughly 4 tablespoons of vinegar. I could potentially still add some more. And I know that one of the things that is sort of the limiting step, again, is the surface area. It's going to take time for the vinegar to go through, for the dye to go through and bind. But we are at a concentration where we should start seeing those colors absorb. And so now I'm going to let this go for 15 minutes, and we'll come back and see where our dye bath is looking. All right, after those 15 minutes, I still got a lot of color here. We're on really low heat. If I crank it up to high, you can see that we're probably not going to start bubbling really quickly. I think that even though I know that there's probably plenty of vinegar in here at this point, I do want to ramp up the acid. And I am going to add 4 tablespoons of the white vinegar. I know that the slow absorption is a fact, as I've mentioned many times, of the surface area. I cannot tell, yeah, maybe it's getting a little lighter, but it's hard to say for 100% sure. But now there should be plenty of acid in here. But the question is, since I turned up the heat and we're not seeing bubbles right away, is maybe we do need to up the heat a bit for these blues to bind. And, you know, even so, there is a lot of saturation in what we can see already. So I think that I am going to go ahead. I wonder how long it'll take for this to start bubbling. I'm gonna crank the heat and stick around here until we get to, like, you know, low simmer. We see movement on the surface, and then I am actually going to turn off the heat completely. All right, we are now hot enough that we are seeing some movement. The color is definitely a lighter blue than it was a while ago, but this has just been a couple minutes since the last clip. I'm now going to turn off the heat completely, but I'm going to leave this yarn in the pot so it can cool down and absorb more of these blues. And so we'll check in a couple hours and see if it needs any additional help. Okay, let's take a look at Alana's yarn. The water has basically cleared, and the pot has also cooled considerably. Yeah, so when I look at this side, I am really reminded of one of my earliest cake dyeing experiments where I looked at a tightly wound cake versus a loosely wound cake. But these colors are different, and so I'm really excited to see those pinks play into these blues and browns. Ooh! It is the next day, and I mean, we're still really wet here. Ooh, look at that. I think I want to start unraveling it from the center. If I can find, there we go, the ends of this yarn. I think that unraveling it from the center maybe will result in there being less twist around each other. But looking at this now, how do we get pink in the middle? I guess the water really did soak up in that center region. That is cool. So I'm gonna go wind this around a 2-foot niddy noddy, and then I'll be back and we'll take a look at the gradient. I'm unraveling from the inside, as you know, and it's looking like a bowl right now because of the uneven cake shape. It reminds me of the bowls I did in pottery class, so I just wanted to show you. Even unraveling from the inside, the strands are twisting around each other, but so far it is fairly manageable. when I'm winding wet yarn onto the niddy noddy, I try to keep things really loose because I don't want to stretch it. I don't know how much of the yarn is left at this point, and I can't exactly weigh it because it's full of water, so that's not going to tell me much. But you can see how twisted it is. Darn, darn, darn. I think if it were dry, it wouldn't be as big a deal. But, too bad. No matter what, Alana, I think that you're going to get a beautiful, beautiful yarn. And so it'll still be worth it. It's just not as easy as, say, unraveling a commercial blank or something. The unraveling took a while, but look at this gradient. There's a lot of sort of a rose pink with almost some blue and gray patches. Then it starts to be a little more speckled blue and pink, and finishing at this, I don't know if it's a burgundy or a brown. It's a little hard to tell what color it actually is while it is wet. I would say that the majority of this yarn is definitely in the pinks, but it absolutely has some really, really great potential for some kind of fade project, and it's already worked into the yarn. With 2 skeins, you might need to alternate skeins in your project, or if you want to do something symmetrical, it would be perfect for that. But yeah, I think it is pretty cool. Now we can wash our yarn. I think that this technique is so cool, but maybe 200 grams is a little bit much for one cake. I think that maybe you could do some smaller double-stranded cakes, and that water is clear. You could try doing some smaller cakes with, say, 100 grams at a time, and then make it, like, do your color such that you could create a fade from one cake into the next, maybe. If that makes any sense. I think it would be a bit easier to unravel. I'm adding a little bit of dish soap, but I'm not expecting any real bleeding to happen. I think that this color is not quite what I expected. I think I expected there to be a lot more blue in it than the pink, but I am really excited with the way that these colors penetrated this yarn. So I'm going to rinse it a couple more times and then hang it up to dry. Here is the finished dry yarn. It might not look it because of the way I have it laid out, but these are identical skeins of Knit Picks Wool of the Andes worsted weight yarn. And these are unique speckled mottled gradients with this rose pink to almost navy and burgundy on the other side. There might be a little hint of teal throughout, or almost a little bit of gray in some of these patches. I think this yarn is absolutely stunning, but I am perplexed as to how we got this kind of gradient. Our mixture of dyes started with 2/3 of a teaspoon of delphinium blue, a 1/4 teaspoon of black, and an 1/8 teaspoon of brown. And somehow we got a lot of pink, which does make sense from that brown and from the black and delphinium blue. But wow, I'm just not used to the pinks spreading out this much. And maybe this was like some factor of starting with this much pink involved and letting it soak in the pot for so long. Whatever it is, the colorway is absolutely beautiful. But honestly, I was expecting to see more reds on the outside and blues on the inside, because that's the way we usually see these colors break. And you know, if I had started with some acid in the pot, that's probably what we would have seen. Or maybe if it was a superwash yarn, the same thing. We might have seen those reds strike to the outside. But maybe since this was the 100% wool, where colors tend to absorb a little bit slower overall anyway, maybe that just made a difference. I feel like we all got a bit of a treat here today, because it's not often that I am completely blown away by how colors break. And I'm absolutely floored today. Gosh, the more I think about it, maybe the pinks were absorbing so slowly that it really did give time for some of that liquid to get to the center. But then by the time I was adding the blues, there was some in the center, but what was on the outside, I mean, it's not like it struck that fast, but maybe there was just enough acid that it wasn't penetrating very far when it did strike. I mean, I don't know. I'm sort of trying to rationalize this beautiful surprise. Alana, thank you so much for sponsoring this episode of Dyepot Weekly. I think that we ended up with a surprising colorway, but it is stunning nevertheless. And I honestly don't think if I had tried to go and achieve this colorway that that's what we would have ended up with. If you would like to sponsor an episode of Dyepot Weekly and get shout outs in the episode and then receive the yarn that I dye in that episode, you can learn more in the ChemKnits Creations Etsy store. There are links in the video description and iCard. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe to the ChemKnits Tutorials YouTube channel and give the video a like. Thank you so much for watching.